I am Asha Dore, and I'm the editor of Parley Lit. Would you like to introduce yourself and your new re-released book?
I'm Meg Weber, and I am an author from Portland, Oregon. And I released my debut memoir in 2021. It's called A Year of Mr. Lucky, and the small press that put it out at first uh, ended up closing its doors, and so I was able to re-release it last year, or yes, last year. And then later this year, I'm releasing an audiobook version of A Year of Mr. Lucky. And I'm probably also going to issue a chapbook with a few more Mr. Lucky stories that just need to be in the world.
I'm so excited about that part. That's thrilling to me. I can't
Thank
believe it
you.
was only 2021 that it came out. It seems like it's been so much longer, but I guess the COVID years equal more than 1 year each.
Right, absolutely. The COVID years, and it's possible we were workshopping writing at the same time, and it took me 6 years to write the darn thing. So it's possible that it's been trying to be in existence for longer than that.
Right, right. Yeah, that's true because I remember being in different workshops with you about some of these stories, and it's really interesting to talk to you now. A lot of the reviews that are coming out for us and will have come out by the time this review is published are focused on COVID books or just books published in 2020, 2021, even 2022 that really didn't get the kind of momentum and community conversation that they get now and got before. So, yay.
Right, which is why it's so exciting that you're doing this for authors to give us a chance, because I don't think any of us dreamed of debuting in the middle of a global pandemic and not being able to do a tour or any of those things. So it's exciting to have these books have another go at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you record the audiobook or was it someone?
I recorded the audiobook. I spent a weekend just reading through it. And then I have a really good old friend who is a musician and is doing all the audio tech for me because I don't understand how to do any of that. And we're getting to the finish line of mastering the files and getting them all set. So I'm really excited. And it was really fun to go back through and read it out loud, and I'm so far removed from the things that happened in the book that I enjoy getting to sort of be in it again, but with
Mhm.
a whole lot more emotional distance than I had when I was living it or writing it.
Right. I think that's really interesting. The big thing with Parley Lit is making literary experience something that you can experience with other senses, which of course is happening elsewhere. I just really like it and want more of it. So I'm trying to make a space where people are encouraged to do that more. And for me,
Mhm.
whenever I have done something out loud, especially if I've had to record it and make it more precise and be thoughtful about that, not just a reading where I hope for the best and deal with the results afterward. I feel
Mhm.
like I have a really different relationship with my work. Do you feel like that's true just in the speaking of it out loud?
I do. It was actually really fun because I knew how these words would sound when I wrote them. Uh, and I also knew the intonation and the way that I imagined Mr. Lucky would speak these words. And so it was really fun to sort of step into both of those, able to say things exactly the way I either said them in person when it happened, when it was dialogue with him, or the way I heard it in my mind. That part was really fun. And I feel like I did that pretty well without relying on silly voices. Like I didn't try to have a Mr. Lucky voice, but when I listen to it, I can tell who I'm being in the moment when I'm reading it. So I like the way it turned out.
I'm always impressed when I'm listening to audiobooks at how different people interpret the characters that they're reading, and all those different things are so incredible to me. Um,
Yeah, it's really wild. I was listening to one last weekend that was narrated or performed by Meryl Streep, which, you know, an amazing actress like her doing this book. It was it was an art form all of its own, aside from the words that she was reading. It was really fascinating.
I bet. What book was that?
It's called Tom Lake. It's by Anne Patchett. It's a novel.
Awesome. I will totally
Yep,
listen to that. That sounds great.
well worth it.
Yeah, Tatiana Maslany does The Hunger Games for a special edition on Audible, and I like The Hunger Games. I mean, it's a likable series, it's entertaining, but when she reads it, it's just like you said, it's an art form unto itself. It's just beautiful. Yeah,
I'll
I
have to
can
check that
imagine.
out. I've never read the books. I've only seen the movies. But I'll
Mhm.
have to check out the audiobooks.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. So let's get back to your book. Will you blurb your book or summarize what it's about? And
So, A Year of Mr. Lucky is about a relationship that I was in. I had just turned 40. I had just divorced from my long term partnership with a woman who is the other parent to my kid. And I was wanting to date men for the first time in my life. I had never really done that. And this book talks about the relationship that I had with a guy that was supposed to be really casual, no strings attached, just fun, and it didn't work out that way. The connection was really strong, and I fell in love with him. He did not fall in love with me. And the book chronicles that relationship. And it was a kinky relationship. That was what we were both drawn to, how we met each other. And it was just supposed to be fun. And it was a lot more than that.
just that it speaks to an experience that I think we don't really get to see or hear about very often in a lot of different ways. I think just, moving from dating people of one gender to another or whatever in that kind of scope, but also kink, which is almost never written about in a literary form. I can think of maybe 3 or 4 books that are memoir. I mean, there's definitely fiction, but I
Mhm.
I just so appreciate that you went into this space that seems like there's just not a whole lot of other stuff to draw from.
Thank you. It's one reason, I mean, I wanted to write the book because I wanted to write my story and have it out there, but I felt the same way. There aren't very many stories out there that are written by people involved in kink that are writing true stories from their life. There's a whole lot of, you know, I mean, there's particularly terrible examples of fiction about kink that I don't even want to mention, but everybody knows what they are. And I there are, you know, there's real people in the world that are having relationships that are built around these power dynamics or these types of sexual play, and we all want to read stories about similar experiences that we're having. So that was another big reason why I wanted to write this book and put it out there.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think that, to me, one of the most important things about kink is that it seems to be so often connected with these really deep existential things inside of ourselves and, ways that we see ourselves, ways that we see other people, sometimes traumas, not always,
Mhm.
and I think that the misperception of kink is so we have such a commitment to that misperception in this culture. The only thing that I can think of in our media that doesn't do that and that actually has an attempt at nuance is in Billions, one of the characters, has a kink, and that's shown in a kind of vulnerable way, at least for the parts that I saw. I haven't seen the whole series. But it's just so
Mhm.
rare. I mean, I can think of one. So I appreciated that too.
Yeah, I haven't seen that. I'll have to check it out. But yeah, that's I wanted to represent that, you know, both Mr. Lucky and myself, we're everyday people. You know, I was a 40-year-old queer divorced parent, and this was the kind of connection that I wanted, and I was able to find it, and it didn't end up being exactly what it was supposed to, but there were a lot of really positive things. We had a great time together, Mr. Lucky and I. My unrequited love situation didn't help matters, but when we were connected, we had a great time. And I think that comes through in the book. And, so does my, you know, being heartbroken and all of that. And the other theme that's in the book that's significantly less fun is in the course of my relationship with Mr. Lucky, one of my siblings dies. And that was something that I wasn't intending to have in the book in any significant way. I did a thing that I'm sure other writers try to do as well, which is I just kind of dropped the reality in there somewhere that my sister had died by suicide during this relationship. And one of my writing mentors that I was working with just pretty much shook her head at me and said, "Yeah, you don't get to do that. If you're going to mention this, you have to build it into the story and you have to share a whole lot more about your sister and your relationship in order for that to be in the book," which is what I ultimately did in the final revision that I did. Was I included that other storyline in more depth.
Tell me your favorite scenes.
The
It's
actual
great.
scenes, the times when I played with Mr. Lucky, there were only 6 of them in this book, and, each of them I appreciated in its own way, but, scene number 5 was the next to the last one that we did, and the whole scene itself was just it was sort of epic. The connection between us, we knew each other well by then, so our banter was really on point, and it was just a really hot exchange, like, the whole thing. So, that's one of my favorites, and then, there were several really significant therapy sessions. I'm a therapist in addition to being a writer, and I don't know, there's nothing like a therapist and therapy. We're like a special breed in that way. It's kind of ridiculous. But my therapist is amazing. And there was a therapy session where she challenged me to a game of tug of war because I wanted to have a temper tantrum. And I that was one of my favorite scenes to write as well, just because it captured the amazing way that she can reach in and meet me where I am and help me process this stuff. So those are 2 of my favorite scenes in the book. I invited people into these things where they don't normally get to go. And as a therapist and a writer and a lifelong therapy client, I can't imagine writing a memoir that doesn't involve some aspect of therapy.
So, do you want to talk about the way that you organized the book?
Sure. For me, I knew I was gonna write it chronologically, and it's called A Year of Mr. Lucky, but it was actually 14 or so months, which was kind of a joke on the fact that I can't count, which comes up in the book. So I did that on purpose. And I knew that I so the book was written. I knew I would write the 6 scenes that he and I did, and I knew that I would write those in full cinematic detail. Present tense, that those were the times when we were in person together. Most of the rest of the book was either it was our email exchange. I knew from the beginning that I wanted to include some of those emails, because that was a huge part of our courtship and how we stayed connected. And then the third part was going to be while I was living that relationship with him, I kept up it was kind of a journal, but I did it on a private blog, so there were a handful of people who could follow along with me. And those blog posts became the other parts of the book. So it was exciting to me to have 3 distinct pieces that I knew would fold together to hopefully make a seamless narrative, and I think it worked. So, and it was a thrill that he allowed me to use his emails. He gave me permission as long as I made him at least a little bit anonymous, and that was great because then I didn't have to create him as a character. He created himself as a character by the way he engaged with me, which made it feel more authentic. I could have written him, but I didn't want to.
I love that too, and that was something I was gonna ask about is just that process of sharing the book with him. Did you tell him about it the whole time or afterward? I'm curious how that went.
So I asked for permission to use his emails, and he gave that to me. And then once the book was finished and it had been accepted by a publisher, again, it was a really small press, so she had to cover her bases. So before she would print it, she needed him to read it and sign off on it that he would not come after me as the author or her as the publisher, because it was just her. So unlike the rest of the time when he would take forever to respond to things, which happened in the book, he read it in about 36 hours and wrote back with really positive feedback for me about the book, and gave the publisher permission and said he wasn't going to get in the way of anything.
That's so wonderful. What a great result.
I know. It
All of
really
it.
was. I was thrilled. I was thrilled, and you know, I didn't I mean, he painted himself in a lot of the sections, but the parts where I was reflecting on him or his behavior were not always the most gracious or um, pleasant, because I was hurt, and he was gracious with me about that. He kind of recognized the places where he wasn't the best kind of person, um, and yeah, I appreciated it.
Do you feel the same now about those stories, or do you have any reflections about writing that book kind of closer to the experience versus now looking back at it?
That's a great question. I can really see, I mean, the events in this book took place 10 years ago, and I wrote most of it over 6 years ago. So I do have a lot of distance, and mostly I can see my part in it. I can see the places where he told me really clearly from the beginning, I'm available for this, I am not available for that. And the hopeful part of me, the romantic part of me wanted to just keep pushing past that, when really he couldn't have been more clear in some ways. There were places where it got a little confusing because he would show up and be really present and attuned and connected to me, but then he'd disappear again. Um, so that part was confusing, but I do, I mean, obviously, we co created what happened in that relationship. And at the time when I was hurt, it was easy to lash out and blame him. But really, now that I have more distance, I created a lot of the things that broke my heart in that book.
Don't we do that so often? I think
We
that's valid.
do.
It's like humans, man.
Exactly.
Mhm. Okay, so what do you hope readers will walk away with from this book?
I think several things. Because, like we said earlier, there aren't a lot of good examples of true stories of real people who engage in kink and who want relationships like this. And so I hope that people will walk away with an understanding that this is a thing that happens, and that people want this kind of sexual experience, relational experience, and that that's valid and it's okay and it's not inherently wrong. It's not, I always like to speak to the fact that done well with full consent and respect for each other, what happens in kink is not abuse. It's not violence, it's not abuse, even though the behaviors can look like it. That's not to say that there can't be violent or abusive things that happen within kink, which makes it pretty muddy. But I wanted people to know that we can decide to do these things on purpose because we want to, and that that's okay.
Who was the reader you were speaking to, and or did you imagine a reader as you were writing, or do you now?
Yeah, that's I like that question. I imagined my hope is that even a third, an eighth maybe of all the people in the world who bought and read the terrible trilogy that is popular about kink, um, that I refuse to mention by name, but everybody read and saw the movies. Um, if if an eighth of those people bought and read my book and saw that folks who engage in kink actually do know how to use consent appropriately, um, and that there's way better writing in the world about this stuff than that. Um, those were readers I hoped to reach. Um, and then I think, other than that, anyone who has felt like, you know, midlife, what are they going to do now? What's available for them in terms of sex or relationship if they're a single parent and they're divorced? It's not the easiest place in the world to be. And so the idea that at that juncture, I went out and found what I wanted and, navigated dating apps and all of that to find an experience that in large part was positive overall. I guess I wanted to reach readers who might be having similar experiences. And even though there's heartbreak in the book, to offer a little bit of hope that there are things out there that we might want to experience.
I think that's so valid and really important too, because I do feel like gotten a little bit better about this in the literary world about, not only talking about young men in their 20s all the time, but I do think that we still have a lot of weird beliefs about how sexless women supposedly are, after the age of whatever, 25, 30, whatever that belief is. And I do think it's improving, but yeah, and just to go into kink with that is so awesome because I don't think very many people even know that there are websites where you can go and just list what you are looking for that is just based on like positivity and sex. And, it doesn't matter if you are vanilla, if you're not kinky, you can still go there and say, "Hey, friends, I'm looking for this." And there are people who will probably message you and tell you what
Right.
they want. It's this whole planet that definitely didn't exist 20 years ago the way that it does now.
I know, I am too. And I don't know if it's like rose colored glasses looking back, but that when I was on the dating apps, and where I met Mr. Lucky, um, they weren't quite the dumpster fire, complete hellscape that dating apps or the experience of trying to date is today in 2024. Um, it's such a mess out there. And it's not that it was perfect back in 2014 when I met Mr. Lucky, but 10 years has not improved that experience in terms of finding partners, at least from my perspective. So, for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, I think that that's true. I mean, I've heard people talk about like the golden age of Tinder, and I'm just like, there was a golden age of Tinder, apparently. Well, the last question is, I think, often my favorite, but it's who would you cast in the TV series or movie of your book? And any thoughts around what that might look like? I love everyone's answer to this.
I was so glad you asked me that question because my answer changed. I answered this when the book came out in 2021, and I had cast Andy Garcia as Mr. Lucky, um, and I had cast Chrissy Metz as me, and I stand by that. I still think Chrissy Metz from This Is Us would play me, and I think that would be great. But I'm a huge Ted Lasso fan, and so I've decided that Brett Goldstein would get to be Mr. Lucky. He's the guy who played Roy Kent. And I know that's a lot of names I just dropped there, but I think that would be hilarious for Brett Goldstein to be Mr. Lucky.
I can see that. I can see both. Well, thank you so much for meeting with me. Is there anything else you wanted to say about your book, about the press, any kind of information that you wanted to share with folks?
I'm just, as an author, I've always dreamed of being an author, and it was such a thrill to publish this first book. And I've been working on a second memoir that keeps changing its mind about exactly what it wants to be, which makes it really hard to finish. For me, it's been really great to have these other elements of the Mr. Lucky book, to do the audiobook, to write the chapbook that has a few more stories. So I'm really excited about those pieces. And those are really great things to do when I don't know what to write for the second book. So it's been a good balance. So, too, thank you so much for interviewing me. This was really fun. And I love what you're doing with Parley Lit. I think it's great. And I love the accessibility aspect of having literature in more accessible forms, so that more folks can engage with it in different ways. So I really celebrate what you're doing.